So now I'm joined by David Barron from live from New York. Hi, David.
How you doing? I'm actually in Woodstock, New York, but
Woodstock, New York.
similar. Yeah.
Okay. Well, now David's a well-known record producer and composer in his own right, and the point of getting you on today, David, was to really kind of help us get a feel for the start of the whole musical journey. But maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit to everyone so they get a bit of a feel for who you are.
Oh, okay, no problem. I am primarily a record producer, and I produced a lot of artists like Jade Bird, who's from the UK, and I work with Lumineers. I work with Lenny Kravitz. I've worked as an arranger, orchestral arranger for Shawn Mendes. Did Megan Trainor's All About That Bass. Worked on a large variety of records, including the Mercury-nominated Bat for Lashes record, The Bride. So I've done a lot. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And a lot of it was done in this room, believe it or not. And I do that, and I'm also an artist of my own right. I release my own music, and I do a fair amount of scoring as well.
Okay, cool. So, where does your sort of love of vinyl and records come from? You know, because I understand you're particularly passionate about the vinyl form.
I am. I grew up in the music industry. My dad was a recording engineer, first a technician in recording studios in New York City. Uh, and then in the mid 60s to late 60s, he had this crazy idea to put together a remote recording truck, which he did with a partner, Larry Dahlstrom. And they put together a truck called Location Recorders, which I think was birthed in 1968. And it had two 16-track recorders on it, which was very new technology, a little console with 16 channels, which is also extraordinarily large for the time. And they would drive around and record live events, live concerts, and make records. So my dad did that before I was born, and then obviously I grew up with that, and I grew up around him, and he sort of taught me how to love. We had a reel-to-reel player in our house with a fancy Macintosh stereo. I guess that was the fanciest thing you could get back in those days.
Yeah.
And he would play the recordings he did of concerts, the raw recordings, before they got mastered, before they were out on records, and you would hear the visceral excitement of live performance,
Yeah.
and in a way that, master tape is incredible. I mean, like your first generation tape, probably the closest thing that you're going to get to that experience today is going to be on vinyl. Digital does so much manipulation to get it to be ones and zeros and to get it to be computer code that there's some ineffable, there's some soul or spirit to audio that seems to get lost in the numbers. Now it's getting so much better than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling at some point I'm going to be like, all right, digital wins, but it hasn't won yet.
Okay. Okay. So your dad, he was a pioneer of that sort of live album recording.
That's correct. He started out as a technician, a studio tech and a repair guy at Fine Recording under Bob Fine. And Bob Fine was a very famous recording engineer who did a lot of very famous classical records. Then he moved over to A&R and worked for Phil Ramone, who trained him to be a recording engineer. And that's what got him in his passion of he loved the live music experience.
Yeah.
Like my dad loved, when he first started out at Fine, the typical session was 3-track. So it was sometimes mono, sometimes it was stereo, sometimes it was, I think he was right on the verge of stereo. So a live band would play, Sinatra would be singing, and it would be the live band, and that would be it. It'd be that experience,
Yeah.
mix it to tape, and that's how we grew up.
Yeah. So you worked for him, I understand, when you were a teenager.
I did. I worked for my dad for many, many years and did a lot of stuff. I mean, from the time I could carry equipment to through college, and actually even after college, I worked with my dad.
One of the most memorable artists that you worked with kind of during that period? What are the stories that you would recount?
Well, when I was a kid, there's quite a few actually, but probably the biggest thing that I remember is I was very young and my dad was recording Stevie Wonder.
Wow.
And he took me to Manhattan with him. My dad took me everywhere. I was very lucky. And we went to SIR Studios, and Stevie Wonder was rehearsing with his band. And I sat there and I watched, I guess, a 3-hour rehearsal as, a 10-year-old.
Right.
And I learned I learned so much in that 1 hour period. I mean, I thought at first I was like, God, he's so mean. And my dad's like, he's not mean at all. He's got to rehearse the band. He's got to get them to do what he needs them to do. And then by the end, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be in the music business.
And so that was your turning moment that made you want to follow this career.
It was one of them, and I think I was already going in that direction, but I think just watching it all come together, like after an hour, it sounded terrible and he was yelling and it was crazy, and then it started to sound better, and then it started to sound amazing. And I
Yeah.
watched that whole process, and Stevie Wonder's a genius, of course. So it was, I mean, there's my dad let me in on a lot of things like that, which was sort of like behind the scenes rehearsals, and those are the things I remember more than the shows.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. Excellent. Now, obviously, you're now a producer, record producer in your own right, working with a number of famous artists. And I guess what I really wanted to ask you was, the start of the creation of a fantastic record, a fantastic piece of vinyl is the artist, he's got a bunch of songs. He comes into the studio, and all of us hi-fi enthusiasts, we really understand and know that a good piece of hi-fi can really communicate the passion and the recording and the music, but the
For sure.
passion's got to be in the recording first before we even get to that process. So how do you ensure that happens? What goes on in the studio to make that work?
Well, it's I look at it this way. A lot of artists come to Woodstock, and actually I'm in Boise, right outside of Woodstock. They come to my mountain house. They come to this studio or a studio nearby that we work at, and they're mesmerized first by the natural beauty, by usually being away from their regular environments. They're usually very excited. It's like the ultimate vacation for a lot of artists.
Okay, so location of the studio is pretty key in that whole process then.
Absolutely. The way that people
Wow.
feel. I mean, everything from how you feel when you get up in the morning to the food you eat to the people that are around you, everything is important in terms of record making. I would say to keep people inspired is probably the key job of a good record producer, because you want them to sound like it's all new, it's all fresh, and it's magical, and it's the best them that has ever been.
Yeah.
So some of that is psychological. Some of it is simple things like good coffee and all of that silly stuff, but it actually adds up. And then the ultimate is having a good studio, good monitoring, and having just the best instruments and a wonderful Steinway or whatever it is that gets them to be exciting. Sometimes that is literally what we do. We try to make it feel new. The other side of the coin is like you said, everybody's got a bunch of songs. Everyone says, okay, I've got 10 songs. Here they are. Here's the ones that'll make it the record. We usually rehearse them in the room or upstairs on the deck outside. And then we record very quickly. We don't spend a lot of time. We'll arrange it and we'll spend a lot of time afterwards. But the actual process of getting the song down is like, what do we need? What are we going to do? It's all excitement. And that way you keep people in the moment, you keep it moving. And I think for me, I'm trying to recreate the things that I loved as a kid.
Yeah.
Those live concert experiences, watch Stevie Wonder come together, and when you're trying to create it for artists, you realize you get much better performance. I mean, it's crazy sometimes the performances that are the best are these really random late at night, hey, let's try a song. And an
Yeah.
hour later you have the song.
Yeah. Wow. So it must be a bit like being one of these sort of Premier League football managers where you've got a bunch of really, really talented people, and some days they're rubbish, and other days you can get them to perform really, really, really well.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's actually something that my dad taught me a long time ago. He was telling me a story about back to Sinatra. Not that he worked with Sinatra a lot, but he was telling me Sinatra walked in the studio. There's a big band set up. They start playing. He starts singing. About halfway through the song, he's like, yeah, no, not today. And he walks out. Now, he's Sinatra,
Yeah.
and I haven't ever seen anybody else do that. But some days it's not the right days to record a song. You just do something else. And some days, some songs are not ready to be on a record yet. I mean, was it the Rolling Stones that had Start Me Up, and they tried to put it on 5 different records until they finally figured out how to arrange it? There's a time for things.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's amazing. And Are you recording, presumably you're recording everything digitally now, or are you still using analog tape?
I have I record everything digitally to Pro Tools, and I have a Nagra 4S, which is a little portable
Yeah.
analog tape machine. I use that more as an effect. Sometimes I'll record analog tape, like a piano track to analog tape, or sometimes but everything goes to digital just because the amount of control that we need with it. I
Yeah.
mean, I've recorded a lot on analog too, and in the end, digital's gotten so good.
Yeah, because the technology has improved a lot in the last, what, 5 years, 10 years? Where's the big progress been for you?
Well, I'd say in 10 years, it's gotten much better. The plugins, which is what we use to process the sound, have gotten much better even in the past 2 years. I think the last step is our converters are getting better now. And it gets a little bit more technical, but the way that we're taking our analog information and turning it into computer signal, that seems to keep getting better and better. And obviously, I think it could still improve because I record to the Nagra. I'll record a piano performance, and this is, a tape machine that was designed and mic preamps that was designed in 1971.
Yeah.
And I still find it sounds better than recording directly to Pro Tools, which is it's something about it I really like.
Yeah.
Why would you bother with something that's thousands of dollars in fragile and you have to buy tape and we haven't quite got there. We're like here and there's still something above it. The best of analog, is still better than digital.
Okay. Excellent. Now, you're saying the recordings are done quite quickly, so you've got all these artists fired up on the world's best coffee, looking at the world's most beautiful view. They've recorded their most passionate song. It's been laid down in an hour. You then go into the post-production bit, and presumably there's a bit of discussion about, okay, do we need to overlay this instrument? What about this?
Sure.
How do we mix that? How long does that process take?
That process can take a long time, and it depends on the record that you're working on when you do that. For some records, we just did The Wandering Hearts, which is another British band for Decca Universal, and that was pretty fast. We would do the basic tracks, and then the overdubs was usually about a day, and the mix was about another day. So it's about a 3-day process for most pop records. But I've worked on big pop records as an orchestrator, arranger, and then that could be 3 months later. You're adding a big string section something. Depends on the budget, depends on a lot of factors. But in general, I like the 3-day rule is about the right one. Record the song, overdubs the next day, sometimes vocals, a mix, and then send it to a mastering engineer who doesn't ruin it, hopefully.
And how much is the artist involved in those discussions? Are you making those most decisions, or are they driving that process?
The artist drives, in a large part, the artist is, creatively, it's a partnership and it's a push and pull.
Yeah.
In terms of arranging, it really depends. A lot of times that really comes from us as producers. Like, let's add this, let's add that. But if the artist said, no, I don't want to do that, of course you wouldn't do it. And there are some funny stories about labels going behind the backs of artists, including the Beatles. As you know, Paul McCartney wrote that famous note about "Don't ever touch my songs again."
Yeah.
It does happen, but in general, they're involved in it. The artist seems to get less involved as it gets more technical. So
Right.
they listen to mixes and they'll react to mixes, and most of the time it's something to do with them. If they're the singer, they want more singing, or if they're the bass player, they want more bass.
Yeah.
The classic thing.
Yeah. That's why the Police tracks and Paul McCartney tracks have always got lots of bass in them. Yeah.
Yeah, but I love that. We've grown up with that, and you're exactly right. And you can't have a good mix without having one thing be a little bit too loud.
Yeah.
So that process is that, but usually when it comes the end of mixing to mastering, usually the artists, with few exceptions, are almost not involved at all because
So
it gets.
and
Yeah.
during that mixing process, have you had any times where you have got a very clear vision about you're saying, yeah, look, the song's got to go this way, and the artist is going, well, actually, I really want it to go this way, and you've had a football, not a falling out, but a heated discussion.
It happens all the. Yeah, I mean that does happen where sometimes things don't work. What I've seen work. And actually, there's an example from the Bat for Lashes record where Natasha had been recording songs for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And by the time she came to us, it was putting together a lot of demos. And I remember we had one song and it was just, it was not coming out right. Like there was an original vision and there was probably other producers involved. I don't really know. And she got a little bit frustrated with it. And we were like, you know what, we should just start from scratch. Instead of pushing and pulling, let's just re-record it. That's usually the thing that saves the fights,
Right.
or you throw the song away. In that case, it was a really good song. But in general, I haven't seen a lot of fights. Or sometimes people have strong opinions,
Yeah.
and if what I find is the younger the artist is, the more they hate things, like other artists and music. And usually a little bit more experienced artists are a little bit more open-minded.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the younger ones are usually the ones who will come in and be like, I heard this song on the radio and I hate everything about it. And you'll be like, well, okay, I didn't do it.
It's
It's
probably
very,
because the younger ones are at their creative peak, and so they have a lot of their own stuff, whereas the older ones are creatively maybe a little thinner on the ground, so they're happy to plagiarize other people. Maybe that's the answer.
I think it's that, but I also think for most young people, when I meet most artists nowadays, they're usually about 18,
Yeah.
18, 19 for the first time. And they're still in that kind of mode that teenagers are in where their identity is wrapped up in the music they like and dislike.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, they strongly identify with certain artists and they hate certain artists. And I've had hilarious discussions with young artists sometimes about, something's number one for 10 weeks and they'll be like, I hate that song. Everyone should hate that song. And you're like, well, actually, the evidence shows that actually people like it. Uh, it's for me, I guess I look at it all as kind of funny because I
Yeah.
mean, in the end, a true producer and a true engineer is you're trying to capture a snapshot of time in someone's life, an artist's life, a writer's life. And if you're a great photographer, if you're a great producer, you're really getting a beautiful shot of that person at that moment. And if you're not so good at it, you get you got to get a skew shot, and maybe there's an elbow here, or it's out of focus a little bit. Um, that's how I look at my job, and I think that's a good way to look. So all that stuff, the warts and all, I hate this and I love that. That's all part of the photograph.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of last questions. What's the album that you've worked on, or the artist you've worked with, that's been the easiest experience? And conversely, which is the artist or album you've worked on that's been the most painful for you to get?
Painful's a tough one, That's like talking a little bit out of school. Probably the easiest hit I was ever on was All About That Bass, which
Okay.
was a Megan Trainor song from 2015, somewhere
Yeah.
around there.
I know.
My friend Kevin Kadish and I played all the instruments on that song, and Kevin wrote it with Megan in the morning, and sent me like some drums and like a rough things. I added a bunch of instruments, and we were done with the entire track and the entire song within a day. That was the easiest, and it was probably the biggest hit that I've ever been on. Now, in terms of the things that are hardest, I can't say specific people, but I can tell you that the people that are usually the hardest are usually the ones who are the least successful. And and I mean, this is I've borne this out. Like someone says, oh, this is an indie thing, and you don't really know this person, but they're really cool, and usually that's the worst, because whatever it is that have kept them from being successful is, you're gonna discover it too in the studio, and you're gonna have the same experience that they've had pretty much over and over again. Whereas most successful people sort of have a lot of different sort of habits that, like, I do this, I do that, we do this, and ways of working with people that allows them to be successful. So for the most part, it's painful. I'd say the craziest experience that I ever had was a long time ago recording Mr. T. I don't know if you remember him, a TV star.
Yeah. Yeah. From the 18.
From the 18s, yeah.
Yeah.
And somebody wanted him to rap. And
Okay.
they forgot to ask him if he could rap, you know? And that was a incredible session where I realized, wow, he doesn't rap. Like, he's not a rapper. And they were just like, dumb, how could he not rap? Look at him. He looks like he could rap. I'm like, that was not a terrible session. It was actually a hilarious session, and I had a lot of fun, but I walked away going, like, you can miscast. You can be in the, you know, I haven't seen a lot of terrible things. I mean, I've seen people cry, and I've seen people leave the studio, and I've seen all the regular drama, but that's par for the course,
Part of the
right?
passion. Yeah, well, I mean, but that is the whole point, isn't it? Because that's the passion coming through, and that's what you're trying to capture.
I mean, the more passionate people are, usually the better it is. Even like the crazier they are, sometimes the better it is. Although, one of my close friends, Vaughn Merrick, did a lot of the tracking of Amy Winehouse for Back to Black, and he told me some stories about tracking her, and they were interesting. I mean, he said when she was great, it was hair standing up, all like you couldn't believe how good this woman is and how talented she was.
Yeah.
He said the trick was getting her to record.
Yes.
So,
yeah, imagine. Yeah. He obviously didn't have the right coffee that you've got.
well, more of I don't think coffee was what she was after. But I mean, here's the other thing about it. If someone walks into the room and sings for that 3 minutes or whatever it is and has the talent of, say, like an Amy Winehouse or someone on that level, I mean, you should just thank your lucky stars that you're in the studio with them at that moment. And if you capture it right, record it right, mix it right, master it correctly, and it makes it to high quality vinyl or whatever medium, I mean, then it's like one of the luckiest things. So much has to go right for that to be right. That's why we listen to these classic records like Kinda Blue or something like that. And you're just like, how did this even happen?
Yeah, because they're actually quite rare. So what you're saying is, look, it's not, that's why there are a lot of mediocre records out there, because getting that everything, all the stars aligned, is quite difficult.
Well, think about it. It's like if you went to, you went on safari and you're like, I want a giraffe and a lion and this and that. Okay, can you guys all get into frame? And it's like,
yeah, I'm taking you on my next safari.
I mean, it's a little bit like herding cats, but I think that's why when it works, there's enthusiasm, there's magic. The intention always shows through.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can hear people's intention on good records. You can hear what someone's thinking. You can feel it. And, when the audio is good, it's even better. I mean, that's one thing I know that you and your fans are enthusiasts of good audio. One thing that disappoints us sometimes, and you probably know about this, we're listening on amazing speakers, high fidelity, listen mastering rooms, and then people are all listening on their iPhones or on earbuds and it's frustrating. That's a frustrating experience because you want them to have the full picture.
Yeah. No, I think as an industry, the whole hi-fi industry is really, in some ways, it's great for us because more people now are listening to more music than ever because streaming has made it so accessible. But most of them are listening to it, as you say, on their iPhones, on the less expensive pairs of headphones, and all you need to do is take that person, sit them in front of a semi-decent system, and I've seen it so many times. They just go, "Wow, that's amazing! I never knew that track sounded like that." And
I've seen it; it's amazing. It's magical.
And our job as an industry is to get those people in front of these systems, because then it's an easy set. They're hooked. Yeah, so it's great. David, it's been fantastic. I'm going to ask you one little thing. I've somebody told me that you once played synth on a Michael Jackson track. Is that right?
Yeah, that is true. I spent a few weeks with Michael Jackson a long time ago. Gosh, it must have been 2001. Yeah, I think about that. I was working a lot with Lenny Kravitz, which I've worked with Lenny throughout the years, and he wrote a song that Michael Jackson wanted to sing. So Lenny and I and this engineer Henry Hirsch flew out to Los Angeles and made a track. I mean, I programmed drums with a sampler, and I had played ARP 2600, and Lenny played some stuff, and we put together this crazy track. And I got to spend quite a bit of time with Michael Jackson. It was interesting, to say the least. I mean, I was fascinated by Michael Jackson. My dad was the sound guy on The Wiz, so I had met him when he was a kid.
Yeah.
And my dad had worked with Quincy Jones a few times on some other stuff, so I had met Michael like maybe 3 or 4 times in my life, but I didn't know him. I just kind of met him in passing. But being in the studio with him was super interesting. He was very nice, actually, quite kind.
Yeah, but a real perfectionist, I understand as well.
He'd be like, David, can you change that snare drum? I like the other snare drum. And you'd be like, what? And he monitors so loud that you have to wear earplugs. It was insane how loud that guy listened to music.
Wow.
Yeah, and apparently that was his whole career. Super loud, because he had to feel like dancing.
Feeling in the moment. And what was the track that you were playing on?
It's called Can't Make It Another Day, and it was released posthumously by Sony, but they added, our track was more electronic, and then they added Dave Grohl playing drums and Flea playing bass. They just wanted to put a bunch of famous people on the track.
How dare they? Those record studios, they're such cads.
Well, you know what I always go like, they sit around go, who's a famous bass player? Okay, who's a famous drummer? I mean, I'm not against it by any stretch of the imagination. But Michael Jackson made these incredible records when he was 25. He made Thriller. So this is like he didn't lose his way as much as like that fiery period of time is long over. I would have loved to have seen those records.
Yeah, great. David, it's been fantastic. Really, really thank you very much for taking the time out to chat to us today, and look forward to it. And hopefully we'll meet again, and I'll share an Amy Winehouse cup of coffee with you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Take care. Cheers.